Welcome to the Unveiled Mind, a place for us sexy nerds to get down, talk, learn, and share, where we openly talk sex, sexuality, sensuality, and the cultural implications thereof. Today's show I'm very excited about. I had the incredible honor to speak at my local National Organization of Women's Women Mean Business panel this past Sunday. The great thing for me about this was that it was also my birthday that day. I was born on International Women's Day. I was the first transgender person in Rochester to be on a panel with other wonderful human beings that I know of. If I'm incorrect, please correct me. But as far as we can tell, I am the first trans person to speak at this organization on a panel, openly anyways. At least we want to say that and respect all people who may not be open with who they are then or now, but still being seen and recognized, as I may not be the only one just because I'm the only out one. That day really became cemented with such a powerful and amazing message of my own birth and what that means. And so I have known about International Women's Day for some time, I guess, but I had no idea what it meant, where the idea came from, and what, if any, transgendered imprints could be found on the walk through this history. Today's show is going to be dedicated to just that, what just happened, the International Women's Day. And after it, we're going to have some conversations that need to be had always. And I like that this episode is coming out after the day because it's important to talk about this all the time. So March 8th, that is International Women's Day. It is really a day etched in the struggle for gender equality. But I really didn't know how International Women's Day began and whose voices, especially transgendered women, or even gender nonconforming activists, were written out of its history. So buckle up, folks, because this isn't a sanitized version of what you learned in school. This is the truth. All of it. Picture New York City in 1908. Thousands of garment workers, mostly immigrant women, flood the streets. They're demanding shorter hours, better pay, and an end to child labor. Their strike is met with brutal force. But that spark ignites, and I am so tired of it being a need for brutal force. Some horrible thing has to happen before a spark ignites. We are not just having gasoline dumped on us right now. It is already on fire, and we don't even know it. It's a slow burn that we're unaware of. The socialist organizer Clara Lemlich and Teresa Malachi channeled this rage into the first International Women's Day in 1909. So going all the way back to 1909, this conversation is being had. It is 2026 for anyone who's still paying attention. Meanwhile, in Europe, radical suffragettes like Ciara Zetkin proposed an international day at the 1910 Socialist Women's Conference. Their goal? Universal suffrage and workers' rights. But here's the twist. These early marchers included women who'd now be called transgendered. Gender variation wasn't a footnote. It was woven into the labor movements. Ever heard of Lily Elby? She transitioned in 1930, but queer and trans women were already fighting alongside cis women in these marches, even if history erased their names. Lily Elby was born Einar Wagner, was a Danish transgendered woman and one of the earliest known recipients of gender-affirming surgery in the early 20th century. Her life and transition were groundbreaking, challenging rigid gender norms and expanding conversations about identity, autonomy, and bodily rights. While she did not directly influence International Women's Day, which was established in 1911, her legacy intersects with feminist movements in many profound ways. There's lots of bodily autonomy and feminist discourse prior to this, but Elby really kind of started the modern conversation of these two issues. Elby's fight for her right to transition despite immense medical and social risk aligned with the feminist struggle for bodily self-determination, echoing later movements for reproductive rights and then gender equality. intersection with queer feminism, her story, popularized posthumously in The Danish Girl, became a touchstone for the LGBTQ community for feminism, illustrating how gender liberation is inseparable from broader women's rights movements. Challenging barriers. By existing publicly as trans women in the 90s and 30s, LB disrupted the male-female dichotomy, paving the way for modern feminist critiques of gender essentialism. Though her life was cut short by surgical complications, LB's courage precedes contemporary dialogues about trans inclusion and feminism. But today, her legacy is invoked by activists advocating for intersectionality, reminding us that women's rights must encompass all women. When we move on out of New York and we really start looking at International Women's Day, we actually go all the way to Russia. And when I was researching this part of International Women's Day, I'm going to say we do not know enough about Russian history and as well as the internal struggles of its people. But this is just the beginning. I encourage you to learn and research the Russian Revolution movements that happen, and some of them are downright entertaining, but also amazing and fantastic. So in 1917, we're looking at a Russian woman fed up with war and starvation. They strike on March 8th, February 23rd in the Julian calendar. Their protest snowballs into February Revolution, toppling the Tsar. But lurking in the margins, Mikhail Kuzmin, a gay poet and trans feminine activist, an underground celebrity. The Bolsheviks later celebrated Women's Day while criminalizing homosexuality with a little bit of irony. Mikhail Kuzmin, a prominent Russian poet, composer, and writer of that time, was a key figure in queer literature and modernist aesthetics. While his work didn't again directly influence International Women's Day, a holiday rooted in the socialist labor movements, his contributions to the LGBTQ community, visibility, and subversive art indirectly intersects with feminist thought. Kuzmin's 1906 novel Wings, one of the first Russian works to openly depict homosexuality, challenged rigid gender norms and patriarchal conventions. By celebrating queer desire and fluid identities, his writing created space for broader discussion around autonomy and sexuality, themes that are central to the feminist movement. His association with avant-garde circles like the World Art Group also aligned him with progressive artists who questioned traditional societal norms and brought much to the movement. Though not an activist in the modern sense, Kuzmin's defiance of repression under Tsarist and later Soviet regimes resonated with feminist struggles against oppression. His work legacy lies in an unapologetic embrace of marginalized voices, which feminists later amplified in their fight for intersectionality and equality. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the erasure and reclamation post-World War II and how the International Women's Day gets co-opted by government and corporations. See you then. Welcome back. We're moving into the history of International Women's Day. We're going to start talking about the erasure and reclamation. So, thinking about post-World War II, the International Women's Day got co-opted by governments and corporations. It pink-washed into girl boss platitudes. But in the 1970s, trans women of color like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera reignite its radical roots. The Stonewall riots weren't just about gay rights, they were a feminist revolution. Rivera explicitly tied trans liberation to International Women's Day legacy, screaming, "We're fighting for all women." So many of you have maybe even seen the Stonewall movie, which was made in a modern time, especially more during a time that had a little bit more self-acceptance than we're seeing today. And yet it still portrayed the person who threw the very first brick to be a very blonde, blue-haired boy. And without any form of trans identity or gender identity, when it really, the person who threw that brick was a gender differently identified person that biology may have been instilled with. So talking about these people is so vital, and it doesn't happen enough. So Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera's friendship was forged in the fires of rebellion and mutual survival. It's as bond as fierce as the movement they helped birth. They met in the late 1960s, two homeless, marginalized trans women of color who found family in each other amid the hostility of New York City streets. These are two people who were not just, it wasn't just gay rights weren't there. That was only the conversation that was being had. The trans rights were nowhere to be found. And during even prides during that time, trans people were excluded, pushed out, not allowed to be involved. And so with Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera really still holding true to these things in that time period really speaks to the fact of the continued issues that are still plaguing us today, homelessness and women of color. The connection really was visceral. Johnson, the radiant saint of Christopher Street, with her flamboyant flower crowns and unshakable warmth, and Rivera, the fiery street queen whose rage at injustice was relentless as her loyalty. Together they fought the cops during the Stonewall uprising in 1969, throwing bricks and shouting back at a world that refused to see them. They co-founded STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, a radical collective that housed queer youth in a dilapidated old truck, offering food and shelter when no one else would. Thinking back there, 1969, we're talking about youth being unhoused because they're identifying as LGBTQIA. Still in 2026, we're having the same conversation. It's so frustrating and sad. I'm not even a kid person, and I feel horrible for these youth and the children that are in these situations in the world. It breaks my heart. Their friendship was messy, punctuated by arguments, periods of estrangement, and Rivera's struggles with addiction. But it was also unbreakable. There was a lot of issues going on, and the things that people do today to cope were the same as back then. So using drugs and having an addiction was a way of being able to stay alive at that time, as it is today with many people who are struggling with substance use disorders. When Johnson's body was pulled from the Hudson River in 1992 under suspicious circumstances, Farah, haunted by grief, became even more vocal, demanding justice for her friend until her own death in 2002. Their legacy is a testament to the power of chosen family, two outcasts who refuse to be erased, loving and fighting side by side. So how did all of this information lead to International Women's Day, and how did it really start? And who is thought to be the founders? The origin of International Women's Day are deeply rooted in the labor and socialist movements of the early 20th century, spearheaded by fierce activists like Clara Lemlich and Teresa Malakil. Both women were immigrants. Lemlich, a Jewish garment worker from Ukraine, and Malakil, a socialist writer and organizer from Belarus, who channeled their outrage over exploitative working conditions into radical action. Their activism galvanized the brutal realities of the industrial labor, particularly in New York's garment district, where women toiled in squalid factories for starvation wages. The 1909 New York shirtwaist strike, also known as the uprising of the 20,000, became a pivotal movement. Lemlich, just 23 years old, electrified a crowd at Cooper Union by demanding a general strike after enduring physical abuse and poverty wages at the Learson Company. Her call to action was, "I am one who feels and suffers from the things pictured. I move that we go on a general strike," ignited a movement that saw thousands of women, many as young as 15, walking off the job for months, despite police violence and freezing winters. Teresa Malachi's work really led a lot of the future of feminism and what we think about it. So as she began these things, she leveraged her pen as a weapon. A leading voice in the Socialist Party of America, she documented the strikers' plight in 1910 novel The Diary of a Shirtwaist Striker, exposing the sexual harassment, wage theft, and inhumane hours endured by women. Malakil understood the storytelling could radicalize public opinion, and her work became a manifesto for labor rights. Together, Lemlich and Malachi embodied a dual strategy: direct action paired with ideological persuasion. Their efforts caught the attention of the German socialist Clara Zetkin, who proposed the annual Women's Day at the 1910 International Socialist Conference in Copenhagen. Inspired by the American strike, Zetkin envisioned a global day of protest, an idea Malachi and Lemlich had already begun enacting through their localized action in 1908, New York, marching and commemorating in the 1857 workers' strike. The first International Women's Day in 1911 saw over 1 million demonstrators across Europe demanding suffrages, labor protection, and an end to gender discrimination. But it was the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire which killed 146 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, that seared the day's urgency into public consciousness. Locked exits and neglected safety regulations turned the factory into a death trap, echoing the very conditions Lemlich and Malachi had fought against. The tragedy forced governments to reckon with labor reforms while cementing the Women's Day as a rallying cry against systemic oppression. By 1917, women transformed the day into a revolutionary act, striking for bread and peace on February 23rd, March 8th in the Gregorian calendar, a protest that helped spark the Russian Revolution. The Soviet Union later enshrined March 8th as a national holiday, blending its radical roots with state-sponsored celebration. In the interwar years, International Women's Day fragmented along ideological lines. Western feminists distanced themselves from its socialist ties, while Communist Party co-opted it for propaganda. During the Cold War, the day became a geopolitical battleground in capitalist nations. It was downplayed or rebranded as apolitical Mother's Day celebrations. Behind the Iron Curtain, it flourished with state-mandated flowers and speeches. Yet grassroots activists, particularly in global South liberation movements, kept its radical spirit alive. In 1975, the UN officially recognizes March 8th, attempting to depoliticalize it, but feminist collectives like the National Organization for Women reclaimed its militant heritage through protest against wage gaps and reproductive oppression. Today, International Women's Day exists in a paradoxical tension. Pinkwash it with hashtag feminism, even as strikes like Spain's 2018 feminist tsunami, where 5 million workers went out in protest, revive Lemlich and Malachi's legacy of mass mobilization. From 2017, women's march against Trump to Poland to 2020 abortion strikes, the day remains a crucible for dissent. Yet its commodification, see McDonald's flipped arches on International Women's Day, branded merchandise threatens to dilute its power. The challenge now is to honor its origin, not as a Hallmark holiday, but as a day of unpaid labor strikes, street barricades, and the unyielding demand for liberation that Clara Lemlich voiced when she stood battered but unbroken on the Cooper Union stage. Again, this last Sunday, which was International Women's Day, I had the amazing opportunity to sit on a panel of women that mean business. I sat next to a wonderful woman of color who makes these amazing shea butters from just amazing recipes, but also is a business advisor and helps other business people become aware and better in business. I was also joined by a woman who is treading the waters and will be on the show very soon, being an end-of-life assistant as a death doula. She's an educator, powerful, strong woman. I'm very excited to have her on my show. I had a wonderful dance teacher who's offering free dance classes to folks who are victims of domestic violence and focuses a yoga and dance practice for women and people who are traumatized and have PTSD. And at the end, I got to see one of my old students who took my addiction therapy training that I'm a rightful, wonderful one of many great professors and teachers, as she's now the president of the National Organization of Women here in Rochester, New York, be there on the panel as well. Just the simple act of existing and being in a space altogether was both vulnerable and an act of radical feminism. In 2026, a radical act of feminism means I go somewhere. We are at a time where the bow is really tight and is probably already snapped. It's just so big we haven't fully felt the collapse that could come this way. It was moments like this, learning the history and where we come from, learning how we got here and why things are important, to see the ridiculous fact that we're still fighting some things that were being fought about long before 1909. As I end this episode today, it was again an amazing honor to speak publicly and to meet so many amazing people. Take a moment and find history that moves your group of persons. No matter what group you might belong to, find those people that came before you and learn their stories. Learn what they did and carry the wave that they started, because there is a wave coming and it's been hitting us slowly but sure. We've got to create a wave that's just bigger than that and can overtake it. Again, this is the Unveiled Mind. I'm so glad that you joined us for this episode. I hope you're doing well, whatever that looks like for you. And I just hope that you know there's someone there for everyone. See you next time.